All right, welcome to another episode of the WP Crowd. Today we are talking about Gutenberg. And instead of doing our normal introductions, I want everyone to introduce themselves with their name and any experience you have with Gutenberg. So I'm going to go first. My name is Royce Ivan. I'm a WordPress developer at the Walt Disney Company, and I honestly don't know what Gutenberg is. Matt, why don't you go next?
I'm Matt, head of support at Give and WordPress.com, and Gutenberg and I cuddle up every night before I go to bed. So it's I like it. It's cool.
All right, Mike.
I'm Mike Corkum. I'm web developer at Carleton University. I have installed Gutenberg and played around with it. That's the best I got.
And Nick.
I'm Nick Adams, founder and lead developer at Revolt Media, and I have played with Gutenberg. That's a thing.
So, between the four of us, we're definitely the mindset, the experts to talk about Gutenberg.
We are the Gutenberg brain trust.
Yes.
I don't think anybody has done anything more than we have, honestly. Like,
true.
You mean absolutely nothing?
Virtually very little, yeah.
No, I mean I've looked at the code, and one of my coworkers has played around with like adding one of the blocks. Yeah.
All right. So let's just, Matt, since you are warm and cuddly with Gutenberg, why don't you give us the elevator pitch? What is Gutenberg, and why should I care about it?
Gutenberg is basically the future of writing content in WordPress in terms of what its intentions are. Matt Mullenweg has said it will be incorporated into core once it reaches 100,000 active installs from .org. So that kind of changes the nature of exactly what its future is. But right now, it's the way it's supposed to be doing is taking, instead of just one content area where you just go and type your way to freedom all the way down, you're able to now add, like Mike said, little blocks of different types of media. You can put in a block of text that has headings and block quotes or whatever. You can add a block of an image or a video or an embed. The idea of little blocks is supposed to be give people a lot more freedom in terms of how they write their content, and ideally, eventually, plugin authors, theme authors will be able to enqueue their own types of blocks for a lot more flexibility and whatnot. So I don't know if that was the elevator pitch. That was kind of like the whole building pitch, but more or less, that's what I think.
So I didn't really know I thought it was just a new text editor. I thought that was pretty much all it would be. So I'm more curious now, as a fond lover, gentle lover of ACF.
You're just going straight for the jugular. Straight for the jugular.
Is it like essentially going to replace ACF?
I mean, there's a lot of potential in terms of like the plugins that could really be threatened by Gutenberg. ACF, I think, is the one that has the most potential to be threatened by Gutenberg, because when you install it and you go to the post-edit screen, it's not like there's a new editor. Like instead of TinyMCE, you see a little cute little editor thing. It's when you go to the post-edit screen, the whole entire screen is brand new. Right. The whole entire area. So you don't see the publish sidebar. You don't see the categories and posts, categories and tags and all that anymore. The whole thing is different, and it's all done in JavaScript. It's all browser side, and it's a whole new world.
Well, I think it's all React based, I believe. But yeah, that's one of the scary things is that I think that's freaking people out, is that you don't see all of that other stuff. You don't see post meta. You don't see, and also shortcodes aren't working in the alpha or beta, whatever you want to call it, and that's also really freaking people out.
Well, yeah, I mean, shortcodes are not yet supported, I think, is the best way to say it. I'm sure there's no intention to go forward with Gutenberg when it doesn't support shortcodes. That would be insanity.
See, I've heard the opposite, that if there's anything that's going to be removed, it's going to be shortcodes. which is the thing that makes me panic a little.
So if that's the case, or even if it's not the case, let's say they do add shortcode support because they should. I mean, we've been using shortcodes up till now. Is this a breaking change? Is this the first thing that could potentially be the first WordPress feature that is 100% not backwards compatible?
I don't believe so, because they will support shortcodes in one form or another. It might not be a hard bracket typing in your shortcode name type of situation, but it might be some sort of a block is translated into the old legacy shortcode logic in one way or another. There's several different GitHub issues on there already that talk about shortcodes. The problem is they don't have a central decision or direction yet for how they're going to manage it. But I mean, I don't believe that this would ever be something that would be completely breaking changes type of thing.
So
is there a way I could put there? Here's the chat right here. Here's like, I think the best conversation about shortcodes right now.
Awesome. For those of you who are watching, I'll put a link in the description below of the YouTube video, so check it out. Talking about shortcode support. What does this mean for a site that, let's say, is just a regular blog site? Like, what happens to their content? If you have a blog site now that has thousands of posts on it and decent traffic, once you install this thing or once it gets included in core, as of right now, let's say today is the version that goes out, what happens to your existing content? Is it seamlessly added into this new editor? Or is there any other migration things that you need to do to make it really smooth?
Yeah, so right now everything I've seen is that it'll just be one block to start. I mean, it's still a content block. It still uses the same, editor structure per block right now. And so you're just going to start out with one block, and then you're going to need to move that into separate blocks if you want to start rearranging it. Otherwise, your stuff's just going to keep working the same. It's very similar to how other drag and drop builders have handled it, where as soon as you switch over to that, your existing content becomes a single block of a regular text block, because they all have a text block, and so they're all able to do the same content as the standard editor right now, the TinyMCE. And so most people are just going to see that all their old content, they can now edit it into blocks, but they also will have all these new things going forward. So it's not going to break anything except for maybe shortcodes if that somehow were to actually get dropped, which I don't see as even feasible. But for the most part, you're just going to see your content moved into a single block in the Gutenberg editor.
Okay, and then what? And you guys were talking about blocks earlier. A block can be anything. It can be a WYSIWYG, or can it just be like a file? Like, going back to my ACF comparison, can it be any type of field type?
That's the idea. That's the intention.
Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, all you.
Yeah, I think the intention is, I mean, right now in the alpha/beta plugin that you download, there's some base examples of content blocks, but I think the idea is that you're going to be able to customize those and add your own in.
Very similar to what we see already with Visual Composer and Beaver Builder and ones like that, I think is the intention. Or
like flexible content layouts in ACF as another example.
And so, yeah, so is the output the same through the same functionality? Like, you do the content, or get the content in PHP on the template, and that spits out all of the blocks? Or do you have to refactor your code to do like a loop throughout every block? Like, what does that look like now on the code side?
It's the content. It is the content, but that another thing, developers, especially JTrip, John Jacoby pointed out, is the way that they're splitting up blocks between each other is with inline HTML comments, which suck. Which, like, if it's kind of embarrassing to have your whole page filled with a bunch of random HTML comments as a developer. Like if somebody comes to my site and they look at the source and they're like, what is all this crap? But basically they're using those HTML comments to be able to identify each individual block with the long-term goal that eventually you could actually duplicate those blocks in other places, like drop those blocks into a widget or whatnot, and or use them across different posts and pages and whatnot. So it is the content, but each block is also identified, wrapped with HTML comments.
Is it stored in the content post, like the post object, the content, or is it now meta?
Nope, it's the content.
So is there any way to break it out easily?
That's what I was just trying to explain. The HTML, it's not, from what I've seen, it's not easy yet, but they're trying to identify each individual block with HTML comments in order for you to be able to use those blocks in other places. But they're probably going to have to create some helper functions to identify individual blocks. And I'm not exactly sure what kind of logic, like if it's some crazy regex scraping crap, like that wouldn't be fun. But
yeah, I don't know why they wouldn't make content like an array then, and then you would have an array of blocks. And then the content could still reiterate through all of those, but that way you'd still have control over looping as you wish. And then you'd have, I mean, again, I'm comparing it also to like flex fields for ACF because I love them.
Yeah.
Being able to loop through all your layouts and then have a completely separate template file for each layout or each block in this case. Sounds like that's where they should be going from a developer point of view, because that way I can really modularize the template. As opposed to having everything as one big text string sounds horrible.
Mm-hmm. I asked this question. Weston Reuter is from XWP, and he is a core contributor to Gutenberg. I asked him that question because of JJJ's concern. And you could see his response to why they chose HTML comments in the article at our site, at the WordPress site. He has real reasons. It was surprising. It is very nuanced. It is very nuanced what they're trying to do. But it does feel kind of like, that doesn't feel like the WordPress way out of the box to me. But their reasoning is pretty sound.
Well, I'd imagine it's a pretty big toss-up between trying to add a new editor, a new workflow to really bring WordPress into the next realm, to the next new age, while still remaining that backwards compatible tool that everybody kind of loves. I've had my issues with the backwards compatibility thing, so I can't say too much about it. But, if they're going to stay backwards compatible, then it's hard to do new development. So let's talk briefly about the blocks just on the development side. Mike, you said you created a block already. So what's that process like, and what kind of options are there right now?
It's fairly limited. Again, like this is just super early release, and I don't even think there was many options for what I could add. I think it was a text block. I'm trying to remember. It was a while ago that I added it. But it wasn't too bad. It was, it was pretty easy. And I mean, my opinion of this thing overall is that it's a really good idea. I think that the editor experience really could use a facelift. And I think that it's a cool idea. I'm just worried about the implementation.
So, Nick, you are a consultant. I'm curious what you feel like. Matt is on the plugin author side. Mike, me and Mike are both developers working for bigger companies. So, it'll affect us greatly, but we'll find ways around it. You actually are consulting with people who use their own websites. I'm curious what your take is on it, because I've heard the theme author take, I've heard the plugin author take. What about it from the consultant point of view? Are you worried about updating your client's website to the once this comes into core and saying, oh yeah, by the way, there's a brand new editing experience and you're gonna have to learn that?
I'm really not that worried, because it's for the people who are just using like the standard editor, it's going to be an improvement for them, but it's not really going to make it any more difficult. It's a pretty natural editor. Like the using the usage of it isn't like all that weird or difficult to really get your head around. But to be honest, I don't know if it's going to change much for a lot of people who I've built stuff for, because I have most of them. If they're managing content, I have them doing it with Beaver Builder. I'll be honest, Gutenberg is late to the game, and Beaver Builder is a good product. So I don't know that it's going to disrupt as much for people who are already looking to have really rich content that is managed by non-coders, people who can't really do super custom stuff, because there's already products out there that do it and do it well.
It's a good point. I was actually going to ask you next. Was my follow-up was, have you tried playing around with Gutenberg and Beaver Builder, and how do those two play together?
So they run separately. I mean, Beaver Builder has its own editor. So just like how now, if you're going to edit a page in Beaver Builder, you click on a separate tab in the editor, and it takes you away from TinyMCE. It's kind of going to be the same deal with Gutenberg. And, you're still going to have those two separate options. And so they can run side by side. Already tested that out. And really, I think there are going to be times where some people may want some pages that aren't running Beaver Builder, or, something else. There are some other ones that are starting to get really popular as well. And so I think it'll be a perfectly fine setup with people who are going to have this when it finally becomes part of core. And then when they really, if they really build out Gutenberg, then maybe eventually there will be no need for Beaver Builder. But right now it's so far behind because it's so easy to create your own custom modules for Beaver Builder that, I mean, right now to have to stick with the blocks in Gutenberg, it's just not going to be worth it, I think, for people who are trying to offload content management to people who aren't really able to do much other than a drag and drop.
It's, just to speak to that, I think one of the fears that, one of the fears that I had, and one of the fears that I think a lot of people had when they first installed this thing, was that this editor experience was going to replace the entire editor view that's there now. And from now, what I'm hearing from other people and what Nick just said is, I think that maybe it might just be like a third tab option or a different option to edit. I don't know if there's any truth to that. Have you guys heard anything? Because I mean, I think that would be the way to roll this out, right? Like, continue to have TinyMCE in there and continue to support all of the old functionality, but give people also the option to edit in this new way. And whether that's the default way to edit or not, I mean, that's fine, as long as there's a way to switch it back. I think that that's the best path forward, but I don't know if that's the path that they're taking.
Yeah, that's the path that they're suggesting. I pasted another GitHub issue where they talk about other page builders, and they have screenshots, mock-up ideas for how you would basically toggle between Gutenberg as your editor or something else. So most likely that toggle would be triggered by the page builder itself. Like, the toggle would be available in core, but it wouldn't be visible to people who don't have page builders on their site. The page builder, like Beaver Builder, whatever, would have to trigger that toggle. And then, of course, they can control what that looks like as well. But they have mock-ups on the issue of how it would look. Because, like Nick said, I mean, I don't know if like Gutenberg would ever replace Beaver Builder at all, particularly because, especially if you combine Beaver Builder with the Beaver Builder theme, you can control the entire page that way. But Gutenberg really is limited only to the content area currently. Maybe eventually it'll be extended out beyond the content area. But in general, Beaver Builder and Divi, especially, like Elementor, these big page builders, they're really about constructing your whole entire page, not just the content area. So it's kind of apples and Granny Smith apples.
Well, I mean, the one thing that stands out as far as Beaver Builder, and I actually like Beaver Builder when I'm like building something for like my mom, or a website I'm not really going to put that much effort into. I usually just go with Beaver Builder.
You're a horrible son.
That hurt. Anyway, Mom, I love you. My main takeaway with that is that it doesn't seem like Gutenberg's a layout builder, while Beaver Builder does give you the option to like not just add, blocks of things, but also layout. Like, I want a new row. I want a row to be 50-50. I want a row to be, so many columns. And I don't think Gutenberg does that. And I don't think, honestly, it should go in that direction. It should just focus on the content. I think that's fine. But I'm
like
also...
It would be really cool if you could just like add multiple Gutenberg editors as blocks.
Yeah. And I'm actually also really curious what things like Beaver Builder are going to do and I think they should, maybe if these blocks are so important, incorporate creating blocks as part of their plugin, whether it's an additional plugin that you'd have to install like Beaver Builder Blocks. But when you're not on a Beaver Builder page, you get the same type of experience maybe, or the same type of content as far as building blocks go on a non-Beaver Builder page. I think that'd be really interesting, and it would keep them in the game and a little more relevant as this thing rolls out. I mean, I don't know if that's necessary or not, but it just seems like it could be a good way to go.
They are having discussions about some basic column support, but yeah, I think it will be a bit challenging, and it's possible that the theme would have to declare that type of support so that it's reflected on the front end. But they already, even in version 0.1, they had it's a really cool feature in the back end, but like basically the image alignment one is actually really cool. The way that they basically, you can restrict the image just to the content area and the typical float left, float right, non-aligned. But then they had a full bleed positioning for the image. In the back end, in that demo that they have, it looks really impressive. And you're like, oh, I love that. Like, that's awesome. And then you hit publish and you look at your post and you're like, it's not there. Like, that doesn't work. So but they had a lot of discussions about that, and they are now enqueuing a really basic styles layout for the front end for just those minimal type of styles, and that might be the route that they go with the columns as well. That you'll have to declare support for front end columns in Gutenberg, and then that style sheet would be enqueued, or it would be generated differently or whatnot. But I don't know.
That doesn't sound like a good idea. I don't like that.
Columns are a good idea.
Well, no, the fact that the editor dictates front end. So like, I think there should be a separation of concerns there.
Well,
your back end admin and your front end theme. I mean, like with the theme itself, like the way, Beaver Builder works is that it enqueues its layout, right? But not everyone uses the same framework. Like, Mike loves Bootstrap, so he uses Bootstrap.
What's wrong with Mike? Oh my gosh.
But someone else might like Foundation, right? Or someone might like Susie or something. So from a developer point of view, that just sounds horrible. Like, that means they'd have to start injecting column grid CSS into your theme, which you aren't going to want, especially if you already have one.
It's I don't think it's necessarily like styles. It's not styles, it's basic layout. It's not really any different than a theme supporting a line left on images or a line right on images. It's more complex. It takes more CSS to execute it, but and then the theme can do whatever they want with those layouts. It's just the layout part, and then the theme can be like, well, full bleed means this for my theme, and a line left means that for my theme, and things like that. I mean, with Give, we have to enqueue some basic layouts just so our forms don't look horrendous on some themes, because people, users generally are bothered if they install it and then it looks great in the back end, and then they look at the front and it looks terrible. So if there's not just the real basic layouts there to just make sure that the first and last name are aligned next to each other, like at least that, then people get bothered. So, and I think it's the same thing with Gutenberg, that if users on the back end are doing all these cool things with it, and then they hit publish, and on the front end it's not there, they're just going to be like, well, this sucks. This isn't a good experience at all. So there's got to be some sort of concern for the user experience, not just whether it works for a theme or not.
So we've talked about like kind of the user. We've talked about Nick as a consultant. I wanted to touch on one last area, which is, Matt, you're a plugin developer, or your team is you guys create plugins. What are your main concerns with Gutenberg as of right now? What are you hoping is going to change to help, further make it your life easier moving forward versus, some of the difficulties you might have right now with it?
Yeah, I mean, I share the concerns that a lot of people have shared about meta boxes. That to me, I think, is the biggest hurdle with Gutenberg right now, because every plugin that does anything with post meta at all uses meta boxes, and right now Gutenberg does not have a plan, not a real solid, consistent plan for how to handle meta boxes. And the only plan that's been put forward is that you would have this advanced drawer that would load the PHP meta boxes in an iframe, and that to me sounds horrendous. And so there's potential. We've talked about it in terms of Give, like the user experience of being able to drop blocks in the back end to create something cool. Like we've been like, if Gutenberg ends up being in core, then we'd love to extend it to have your Give form be built out that same way. Instead of seeing all the standard Gutenberg blocks, you would see first name, last name field. Plus, hit that in. Here's your Stripe credit card fields. Plus, hit that in. Drag them around to do your layout. Like that sounds excellent. That would be a wonderful experience. So we'd love to see that happen, but it's just all about how they actually execute the post meta, how they execute the custom fields. That it really is the big concern, basically.
Well, I can imagine it'd be a lot worse considering, as of right now, the content is one string. Like you can't say, hey, on save, grab block 5 in the array and save it to a post meta. Like you can't even, at this point, it doesn't seem like you can even like hack that in as something you can kind of separate out the content for, because it's just one string. So that's going to be bad for me too as a developer who develops large sites across many users that use the site. We have a whole bunch of meta boxes for all sorts of features. And while I love the Gutenberg experience because I think that it is the right direction for content editing, when you have a lot of special features that you need to offer your content editors that are all powered by intense meta boxes, that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think how it will roll out, like when it finally is in core or whatever, it'll probably be that custom post types will have to declare Gutenberg support or not. That's what I'm assuming. So, for example, Give, we don't even use the content for Give forms at all. We have our own content field that's separate. And basically, everything that is a Give form is post meta. And it's all, of course, PHP custom meta boxes. So out of the box with Gutenberg, we would just, if they do it the way I'm assuming they will, is that the Give post type would not declare Gutenberg support. So then when you're on your post, you'll see the Gutenberg editor, but when you're on a Give form, you'll see the PHP stuff.
Right, but like we have meta box stuff all over our posts.
Yeah, I don't use a post type really, unless it's like really custom.
Like, I mean, we have several post types, but we also do use news, or post as like our quote news post type, and we have metabox options in there. So I just think they need to be careful that they don't strip support for that for existing content, because that would be a nightmare for us. We have over 200,000 pages of content.
Yep.
So, yeah. I mean, part of me is a little bit worried, but I mean, they've never really broken backwards compatibility before. And I can't imagine, I would like to imagine that they wouldn't break it going forward, because if they did, I think it would really be disastrous. But I mean, people are freaking out, I think maybe a little bit prematurely, because the plugin's still alpha. There's still a lot of decisions that need to be made. There's still a lot of open issues on GitHub. I don't know. I think that we need to wait and see a little bit before we freak out or are all excited for this thing. Yeah.
Well, before we went on the air, you said that you took a look at the code and you weren't particularly happy with it.
Well, yeah, the code's a hot mess, but like.
So why is it a hot mess? Like, what did you notice that as of right now should be fixed?
Just a bunch of stuff in the way that like it's being routed. Like, it's not great, but it's alpha. So I don't want to jump. Like, I mean, if I showed you something that I wrote that was in alpha and you were like, the code sucks, I'd be like, well, yeah, it's in alpha. I mean, like, it's hard to freak out. But I mean, if people are concerned about these things, like, you have a platform, you can go onto GitHub and put your issues in and try to get answers. I mean, I would encourage anybody who's freaking out about this to do that. Like, don't just sit there quietly, write your one blog post after seeing the alpha and say, this is going to destroy WordPress. I mean, take the time, sit down, look at the code, look at the editor, go on GitHub, look at the issues. And if you have a question, ask it, put it out there.
Agreed.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there, unless there's something else you guys wanted to add in about Gutenberg.
That you should install it and write a blog post with it, Roy.
I think I will. Honestly, like, I've been more of a fan of. I kind of agree. I agreed with Nick. I think that it's kind of too little, too late. I think if they wanted to revitalize the WordPress content experience, they should have went straight into front-end editor.
Yeah, we can talk about that another time. I volunteered for that team, and then it got dropped. Let's talk about that sometime.
So I think they should have made the jump into front-end editor versus just trying to hack away at the back end. Like, if you're going to start from scratch, if you're going to say, hey, we're going to start a brand new content experience, right? I feel like Gutenberg isn't good enough. It's not revolutionary enough. It's just taking what you have now and slapping some paint on it and React.
No, that's too much. It's drastically different than TinyMCE.
Sure.
It's drastically different.
But TinyMCE has been around since like 1992. Like, come on. Like, well, I mean, you need a bigger jump than that.
No, but yeah, TinyMCE is still being actively worked on, and actually all the little tiny blocks are actually TinyMCE instances. So when I say it's totally different than TinyMCE, it still is TinyMCE at the end of the day. But it's a radically different writing experience completely. It's like, I mean, whether you like that or not is a different question. But in terms of like going into TinyMCE and like having to type in my hard block shortcodes and from memory, and all that, like it's night and day difference.
So I'm more curious, like, I don't really know, and I probably should have done a little more research on this, but the team behind Gutenberg, like, they should have started with the UX person. Is there a UX person on the team? Like, before people were starting to code this thing, someone go, hey, let's just look at the UX for a second and like forget everything we know about WordPress and create a brand new system. Like, Ghost did that, right? Like, they basically said, okay, we know WordPress exists. We acknowledge that it's a great system, but it could be something completely different, 100% different. And I feel like that was the opportunity with Gutenberg, and they went like 50% of the way. From what I've seen.
You need to install it and play with it first. I mean, it's like, I love the like Ghost's announcement yesterday or day before, whatever, like their preview of what their editor looks like basically looks like something 70% of what Gutenberg already is, basically. It's really slick and they've done a really good job. And I think it's a great, it's a definitely nice experience, I think, but Gutenberg will definitely be a lot more flexible and powerful than that. And I think it already is, actually, in terms of the writing experience and what you could do with it, and all the ways that you can hook into it and all that kind of thing. So
yeah. Sorry.
Go for it.
To kind of agree with Matt, I actually already was checking out Ghost's new Koenig editor. And I thought it was definitely points for Gutenberg in the usability, because Koenig seems a little bit harder for people to grasp if they're not that tech savvy, compared to, I think Gutenberg will be a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think, well, I'm just going to install it and I'm going to play around with it. I'm also curious, from my point of view, what it's going to mean for WordPress as an application platform. I'm not sure it'll have any meaning, any connection at all, but WordPress is still a content management system. So if you are creating an application with it, it should revolve around content. So I'm curious how, like, from my point of view, when you said about that, when you said string for that whole thing, and I thought, okay, JSON object with just a huge string, that's like a nightmare for me. Like, I would not want to try to parse that into separate little blocks. So yeah, I'm gonna play around with it. I think we should have a V2 or something, round 2 of this episode. Maybe we'll talk about front-end editors, or what Gutenberg could be or should be in our opinion, or maybe this is it. Maybe this is what it needs to be. But until then,
I think Roy's just a little bit grumpy that they used React. I mean, he's wearing an Angular hat.
I'm not grumpy, and I love my mother. But if you're watching for the first time, please hit subscribe down below. Make sure to like the video and check out the WP Crowd for other videos. We'll be back next week. Thank you, guys.